change all that.
He was a geologist with what became the U.S. Geological Survey, and resolved to put together an expedition to Yellowstone next summer, the summer of 1871.
Recognizing the potential for publicity around Hayden's expedition, Cook approached him and provided funds for a photographer and an artist to go along.
So he took lots of scientists and, of course, all the usual packers and cooks and helpers, some guests who were sons of influential people.
This team traveled around surveying and mapping the region. They were mostly educated men from the East Coast, steeped in the romantic traditions which they brought with them to an unfamiliar Western landscape.
By the time people go west, they know what they're supposed to see. They've been educated in Romanticism, they've been educated in the sublime, and so what they present is a spectacularly sublime and romantic West.
This was especially true of the images created by Thomas Moran, the expedition's artist.
In Moran's painting of the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone, there's two little figures right in the middle of the painting, and they're absolutely enveloped by this extraordinarily vast, broad scene of this brilliant blue waterfall, mist coming up from the waterfall, and then the river cutting through this wide, multi-hued canyon. You put yourself into the perspective of these tiny figures, and then you begin to realize how overwhelming and extraordinary the landscape is.
We're standing at the edge of the Great Canyon of Yellowstone. He's got a descending foreground, and he's got huge side diagonals which pretty much force you into the painting. And so there's very little to stop you from falling. So that process actually creates the sublime experience.
After the expedition, Hayden began compiling his scientific report on Yellowstone.
He gets a note from J. Cook suggesting to him that he enter into the report a recommendation that Congress turn Yellowstone into a national park or a national pleasure ground. So Hayden's report then becomes part of the scientific evidence for why we need a national park at Yellowstone.
And so began the political lobbying for America's first national park, a campaign fronted by Hayden, but financed largely by J. Cook and the Northern Pacific Railroad.
The campaign was not necessarily a high-minded campaign in the sense that not everyone's motives were to advance culture or to protect American nature. J. Cook desperately wanted a park there to get tourists on this railway he was trying to build.
Persuading Congress to set land aside for a park at a time of unprecedented claims by homesteaders, miners and lumber companies would require some serious justification. Hayden's report stressed that Yellowstone's high elevation and harsh climate made it unsuitable for farming. It also highlighted the scientific importance of the region.
Hayden knew that there weren't very many geysers on Earth, but Yellowstone had the lion's share, 2/3 at least, of all the world's geysers. And Yellowstone had the big ones, you know, the ones that erupted taller than 100 feet. Big stuff in geology. So he drew the boundaries of Yellowstone specifically to try and encompass all the geysers.
Those lobbying to make Yellowstone a national park also appealed to Americans' growing sense of national pride in their natural heritage.
One historian has talked about what he calls monumentalism, which is the idea that America had something that was unique, one of a kind when compared to the old world culture of Europe.
Europe might have cathedrals, and Europe might have a long history, but the United States is Yellowstone. The United States has mountains. The United States has a sublime scenery that's better than anything that you can find in Europe. And the usual comparison is to the Alps, that these are just far better than the Alps. So what they begin to do is give this sense of American nationhood as not needing the European past. It'll take on these natural roots, which Yellowstone itself becomes a foundation of.
To ensure Congress understood the monumental nature of Yellowstone, Hayden held an exhibition of images produced by his expedition. Moran's colour sketches and the landscape photographs of William Henry Jackson.
And that illustrated to the members of Congress that Yellowstone was a place of curiosities and grand wonders that was deserving of preservation.
The act creating Yellowstone National Park was signed into law by President Ulysses S. Grant on March 1, 1872, and its wording became a blueprint for subsequent national parks.
And it said that the tract of land lying near the headwaters of the Yellowstone River would be forever free from settlement, occupancy, or sale, and set apart and dedicated as a public park or pleasuring ground for the benefit and enjoyment of the people, and declared that they must be retained in their natural condition.
But retaining them in their natural condition was not a charter for nature preservation by modern standards. Hunting, fishing, and the cutting of timber would all be allowed in the new park.
They were concentrated almost entirely on those marvelous geological and geothermal wonders. They didn't give a thought, really, to so many things that we value the place for now, like wildness, like its fantastic array of wildlife.
And there was another, more ominous oversight.
In the act, there was no reference to Indians living in Yellowstone. But in 1871, Dr. Hayden specifically asked members of the Shoshone tribe to leave and go to reservations. And some of the tribal members did leave the park at that time, and others did not.
The very moment that the United States begins to set aside romantic places like Yellowstone or Yosemite as icons of American nationalism is this very same moment